अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाजरीन, पाकिस्तान के करंट अफेयर स्पेशल में आपको खुशामदीद कहते हैं। नाजरीन, आज के प्रोग्राम में हम आपको कौमी सलामती के मुशीर डॉक्टर मोईद यूसुफ की खित्ते की सूरत हाल और इस तनाजुर में पाकिस्तान के मौक़िफ़ के हवाले से गुज़श्ता रोज़ गैर मुल्की मीडिया के नुमाइंदों से बातचीत उर्दू तर्जुमे के साथ दिखाने जा रहे हैं। प्रोग्राम के पहले हिस्से में हम आपको डॉक्टर मोईद यूसुफ की ज़बानी अफगानिस्तान की मौजूदा सूरत हाल के हवाले से पाकिस्तानी नुक्ता नज़र, इस बाबत इलाकाई ताकतों के हमारे साथ रवाबित और मुस्तकबिल के मुमकिना मंजरनामे के बारे में उनकी गुफ्तगू दिखाएंगे। जबकि जो प्रोग्राम का दूसरा हिस्सा होगा उसमें पाकिस्तान के भारत के हवाले से सिक्योरिटी खदशात, भारत बिलउमूम और मकबूजा कश्मीर में बिलखुसूस इंसानी हुकूक की खिलाफ वर्जियों और दुनिया के लिए इसके खतरात की बाबत पाकिस्तानी मौक़िफ़ दिखाएंगे। नाज़रीन, 15 अगस्त को तालिबान की जानिब से काबुल में दाखिल होने के बाद से ये पूरा खित्ता पूरी दुनिया की नज़रों का मरकज़ बन चुका है। अहम तरीन हमसाया होने के नाते पाकिस्तान तालिबान की हुकूमत के क़याम के बाद अफगानिस्तान में अपने किरदार को कैसे देखता है और दुनिया को इस हवाले से क्या पैगाम देना चाहता है, इसी पर कौमी सलामती के मुशीर डॉक्टर मोईद यूसुफ ने गैर मुल्की मीडिया के नुमाइंदों के सामने तफसीली रोशनी डाली है। आइए डॉक्टर मोईद यूसुफ की ये गुफ्तगू आपको उर्दू तर्जुमे के साथ दिखाते हैं।
The purpose of requesting all of you to come here is to basically talk about the regional environment. Afghanistan, of course, is the topic that everybody has been talking about and discussing, and we'll spend a fair amount of time on that. But I also want to talk to you about the East, which is India, because at the end of the day, both of these are linked, for us at least, as we sit in Pakistan and see this. I'm not going to be as brief as usual. You'll have to indulge me on this. I'll go through a few slides, and then we can have a conversation as you please. Let me just run you first through the Afghanistan side of this, a little bit of background, and then where we are today, and then I'll link that up to our eastern border and neighbor. So the very first thing I want to say, and for those of you who know me, candor is a weakness, so this is going to be a very open sort of conversation about what Pakistan thinks. This slide essentially, in a minute, explains to you where Pakistan versus the rest of the world that was involved in Afghanistan was over the years. And it's important to understand this, frankly, because unless you do, the entire narrative of where we are going to go from here is not situated in the right context. And this is, of course, as we see it, the conversation in terms of the international presence in Afghanistan remained focused on a military victory. From our perspective, for way too long, the conversation continued to be, we need to defeat the opposition, which was initially Al-Qaeda and then the Taliban. Pakistan's point throughout, since 2007-8, for sure, when terrorism started hitting Pakistan in a major way, was that the only way forward is a political settlement in Afghanistan with the Taliban. And this conversation continued throughout, and today we have a result which has shown all over again that that military victory, that idea in the Afghan context simply cannot work, even to the point that Afghans started looking at the government and the people supporting them as being supporters of the international forces who were present there. Then there was this conversation about there is a 300 plus strong security force that is now the new game in town, is going to defend, is the one that's going to keep the new structure together. And now Wali Nasser, the former US official, has written in a book, so I don't need to say it, people didn't believe me when I used to say it before, that in 2010, General Kiani, the Pakistani army chief at that time, told the Americans, formally President Obama and others, that this army cannot stand in the context you're creating it in. The moment you leave, there will be a mess left behind and we'll have to deal with it. Understand the local context, understand that the armies take a long time to be created. In any case, again, the conversation was ignored. Third, the famous, do more. The point around this being, well, Pakistan isn't doing enough against the Afghan Taliban, they're present here, etc. You need to do more. And our message categorically, today people say, well, Pakistan played a double game or whatever, was constantly summarized as we have already done too much. 80,000 Pakistani casualties, 152 billion in economic losses, and at the height, 3.5 million internally displaced people. If this wasn't enough sacrifice, mind you, for a war that we had nothing to do with in terms of starting, was not of our making, and during this process, we were the only ally, I think, ever that was being directly bombed within Pakistan as well, at the same time with drones. The point I'm making is, there is this conversation that continues in the Western media, international media, oh, Pakistan could have done more. Or Pakistan didn't tell us that they cannot do more. Explicitly, again and again, Pakistan's point was, we've done too much. We are not going to take down another 80,000 people for a war that we had constantly said will end up without a military victory for the external power. And so if the outcome is going to be the same, that policy or that strategy won't work. Then if you summarize everything that the world was saying in terms of pointing fingers at Pakistan, what was the point? The point was, this border is the issue. There are people who cross over into Afghanistan and cross back into Pakistan. And they are the problem. Okay? If that is the case, logic would have it that the way to solve the problem was to manage the border. If the whole problem was people crossing over from the border, then it's just logical to say, okay, let's manage the border. So, when you talk about managing the border, what did Pakistan do? Starting in 2010, 2011, 2012, Pakistan first of all offered a joint border visibility mechanism to the Afghan side. It was rejected, and to this day there hasn't been a response of what alternative could be there. Then we talked about fencing the border, and the Afghan government opposed it, and we got no support from any Western country. Then we talked about formalizing border crossings. There were about 61 informal crossings through which people have frequented this border for decades and decades, actually centuries, with informal identity. So we said, let's formalize that and put biometrics on the border so that both sides can know who's crossing and who's not. And then more recently, we talked about a formal visa regime. Liberal regime, whatever visas, but let's, like mature countries, like modern countries have passports, visas, so that we know who's crossing over, so that every person that's frequenting the border can be visible, identified, and if there's a problem, that can be talked about. We even went to the extent of saying, if you think there is anybody in Pakistan anywhere, don't tell us. Just come to us, talk to us, we will go, and you take us where it is, and we will go and raid that place to see what is there. So I'm not trying to explain to you, I'm right, somebody else is wrong. All I'm saying is, just think logically that if I had something to hide, if there was any problem in what I was saying, why would I be bending over backwards to offer manning and managing that border? And why would the Afghan side continue to oppose any management of the border? The argument given was, oh, it's the Durand line. We don't accept it, and that's why. The whole LOC is fenced. If that's the problem, it doesn't mean that the Kashmir issue has disappeared. So the point to understand is, there was something deeper happening here. And I'll come to that in a second. Related point, we were regularly told there is a problem because people are there, and we kept saying, if there is anybody, it's the Afghan refugee camps that are misused. And so you cannot expect us to go into 3 million people or a camp of 400,000 people and go and start picking needles out of a haystack. It is not possible. No country can do that. So the way to do that is to arrange a dignified return of the Afghan refugees, and then come and talk to us where you think some place is being misused. We are told that the situation in Afghanistan was improving. There were definitely qualitative improvement, development, whatever. Absolutely no response to a dignified return of the refugees. Which, by the way, we have graciously hosted, still host over 3 million, and not as a favor to anybody. They are brothers and sisters. We will continue to do whatever we can. But in any case, the solution to the problem, or the allegation, was the dignified return didn't happen. And finally, we constantly kept pointing to the problem of Indian use of Afghan soil to perpetrate terrorism in Pakistan, and we were repeatedly told India is a force for good. So this is the discrepancy in summary form that played out throughout these 20 years. And where I want to take you is the end of this war and who seems to have ultimately been proven right. Let's go to the next slide, please. Again, just to summarize, here is the conversation. Don't need to speak to it. There are two views to this. You see one on one side, you see the other on the other. I just want to implore everybody here. If any of the countries you belong to or report for, or any media outlet, if they would have had 80,000 casualties, forget about everything else, what response would that country have given? And why did we have these casualties is very important to understand, because we joined the US-led war on terror in Afghanistan, and the entire backlash from militants came because of that decision. We actually joined the West in targeting people who ultimately turned against us and killed our countrymen and martyred thousands of soldiers. Forget who's right, who's wrong, what's happening in the war. If any other country would have had 80,000 casualties, please tell me what the conversation in that country would have been. Today, I keep reading in the West, countries are expelling Afghan refugees in these conditions, 5, 10, 15, 20, closing borders. Close to 4 million in this country, and the only conversation people can have is, you need to be ready to take more. If this is not double standards or a double game, I'm not sure what is. Next slide, please. So, now you can say, we had a view, Pakistan didn't offer an alternative. And I keep repeating that we, for the past 10 years, constantly said, lead with the political solution and use kinetic only as needed. The view was, no, they need to be defeated, because there was a demonization of the enemy, to the point that I remember being in the US back in 2004-05, and these conversations about talking to the Taliban. It was almost like people were saying, these are subhumans, how can you approach them? Next. Two quick clips for you, just to say, when people say, well, Pakistan didn't speak the truth. Pakistan has been duplicitous. Pakistan didn't say what it was doing. I just want to show you two clips, and the left one is my Indian counterpart, so that you don't hear it from me, and the right one, of course, everybody knows. Please go ahead.
That 325,000 Afghan National Army and the police will deliver. It will hold together. It has been equipped. It has been trained. It has got officers who are sufficiently motivated. And it is felt that irrespective of what happens at the political level in Afghanistan, the strong military and the police will remain a disciplined force, upholding the constitution and the democratic values of the Afghan state. This is an assumption. In last 12 months, I have met at least 15 to 20 top Pakistani security officials with the rank of Lieutenant General and above in different places and others. Not one of them has subscribed to this view that this army will be able to hold back, irrespective of the fact what is their weapons, what is their training level, what is this thing. They say there is a mismatch between the officers level and the cadres, and once the ethnic loyalties come up, once there's a transition of power, and again these things, this will get probably, to create a national army is a time-consuming process. It does not happen overnight, but I don't believe them, as I have never believed many Pakistanis. I don't believe them. But this is a question mark.
So, very interesting. Very interesting. A story of what Pakistan said exactly what happened, and at the end he says, I don't believe them. Although that's exactly what's happened. I leave for you to decide where the logic is. Let's go to the other one.
That there are lessons learned. There is no military solution in this part of the world, in Afghanistan. Now, what I hope is that it should be a concerted effort for peace. I personally met Biden and explained to him the futility of what's going on in Afghanistan. It's an unwinnable war. There has to be sanity. There's got to be a change of strategy. In Congress, at least, the majority of public opinion in the US says, bring the soldiers back. There is no military solution. If there is no military solution in Iraq, how do they think there is a military solution in Afghanistan? Eventually, Afghanistan is going to become a bigger quagmire than Iraq. Was someone who kept saying that there's never going to be a military solution in Afghanistan. I kept telling Pakistan government whenever I had a chance. I came here in 2008. I spoke to senior Democrats. I told them that there will never be a military solution in Afghanistan. There is no military solution in Afghanistan. There is only one solution. In the coming days, we will be able to urge the Taliban to speak to the Afghan government and come to a settlement, a political solution.
All right, so just to lay that out for you, because I know that the number one question that comes up is, well, Pakistan didn't say what it was doing. And I've just put in front of you where the world was, where we were, and if the world had concerns, we had given a clear alternative in terms of border management and political settlement, which was not accepted. Today, as we stand, and the way the situation has unraveled, I also want to be clear that in 9 days or 11 days, what happened in Afghanistan preceding August 15, somebody has to be no less than crazy to think that this was manufactured somehow. Who was telling the army not to fight? Who was telling people not to stand up for their state? Who was telling the Afghan president to lie to the US president, saying days before he fled the country, there is a full-scale invasion or whatever happening from Pakistan, 10 to 15,000 people have crossed over. What happened to all the satellites of the world? What happened to all the intelligence? 10 to 15,000 people have crossed over to fight. This is the delusion and frankly the deliberate manipulation of narrative that went on for years. Pakistan was blamed and we kept reminding the world this is diversionary to take the attention off the internal failures. Look at what is happening. Now you go back and look at SIGA reports from the US, this US sort of watchdog, from 2015 or 16, repeatedly saying, essentially, this is not going to work out because of internal problems. But unfortunately, nobody paid attention to that. Today, we are again saying something to the world which is not fashionable. But it's as truthful as it was at that time. It may be as difficult to absorb as it was at that time. But let me just spend a couple of minutes to say where we stand and where we think this should go. Look, the world, we are at an inflection point. Afghanistan is yet again at a crossroad. And I see two options. Either for the first time, Afghans can have the opportunity to get to peace after 4 decades of war. Or we can find a way to help them come out of that, not for the sake of this government or that government, but for the sake of the average Afghan. That average Afghan that all of us keep talking about all the time, but that Afghan keeps asking whether the world is really interested. Number one, there's the option of abandoning. Happened in the 90s, led to an economic collapse, a civil war, and international terrorism. Western leaders, President Bush, Secretary Clinton, others came out and said, we will never make that mistake again. If abandonment happens again, you don't need to think too much to know what will happen. There will be a security vacuum. You already know ISIS's presence there. Pakistani Taliban are present there. Al-Qaeda is there. Why do we think we want to risk a security vacuum in Afghanistan. We already know that these groups are sworn enemies of Pakistan and the West. Second, if today Ashraf Ghani was president and the world came to Kabul and said, for 2 months we will not pay you a penny. There will be no assistance, you are on your own for 2 months. What do you think would have happened? A collapse. Simple as that. We know it was a war economy and there weren't enough indigenous resources. So if we go the same route today, it may be, popular to talk about wait and see, but wait and see essentially means a collapse. And then you have all sorts of other problems in the past, narco trafficking, this and that, which are always linked to security vacuums and governance collapse. And then finally, the humanitarian aspect, which, let me just make this point clear. The world is talking about it, everybody should talk about it. We have helped, we've sent planes, we will send other goods, but humanitarian assistance is just a stopgap arrangement to ensure that there is no immediate humanitarian crisis. That does not equate to governance, institutional and economic support which is needed by any country to survive in the conditions that you find Afghanistan in. But if you have a humanitarian crisis, there's going to be a conversation about refugees. The other option is engaging. And let me be clear, by engaging, you essentially are saying, we are constructively going to try and look at how to help Afghanistan for the sake of the average Afghan. Number one, there are counterterrorism interests. Let me be absolutely clear, the world has engaged with the Taliban. Doha was broad public eye. Other contacts, we know that other countries have dealt with them on evacuations. There is an interest on dealing with counterterrorism. But Pakistan is not going to say one thing and do another thing. The other countries should also do this. How do we ensure Afghanistan doesn't become a haven for terrorists? Engagement will get to that answer. Second, the world is saying government, human rights, inclusive government, not government. If the world is interested in this conversation needs to happen directly with the new Afghan government. And any influence that needs to be created to mold governance in the direction that the world wants, have that conversation directly. But without engagement, that's not going to be possible. What Pakistan believes of this or that is not important. You've got a new government, they've got Afghanistan under control, and so that conversation needs to happen. If the conversation doesn't happen, the influence won't be there. Then the next question, well, is there influence? Look, if the Taliban have signaled clearly, which they have, that they want to remain engaged with the world, they've told global powers not to close embassies, etc. And if they have said clearly that engagement would bring legitimacy and assistance, it's not Pakistan that's going to provide that. We will do whatever we can, but we don't have the kind of financial condition to provide the assistance on our own. We can't provide that legitimacy, that's the West. And that's the leverage. But if you engage constructively, then that conversation can happen. I'm not here to plead or make a plea, engage, not engage. I am just telling you very clearly from Pakistan's national interest where we think we should go. Then there is the economic plan, as I said, beyond the humanitarian. And finally, I've really become, I'm sorry to say, allergic to this idea. Everywhere the conversation is, manage the next humanitarian crisis. Why? Why not prevent the next humanitarian crisis? Why not ensure that Afghans don't have to be under duress again and look to be displaced? And even if that condition comes, I think it is incumbent upon the world, especially those who were there for 20 years, to make sure there are secure zones within Afghanistan where they can be housed. Pakistan is in no condition right now to accept any more refugees. We will do whatever we can for our Afghan brothers and sisters, but the world has to take this responsibility to ensure that we prevent a humanitarian crisis. All of these are no favor to anybody. This is very much Pakistan's own selfish national interest. We have a 2,600-kilometer border. If Afghanistan destabilizes, the spillover effect comes to Pakistan. As I've told you, after Afghanistan, we are the biggest victim for the past 4 decades. We are not interested in going there again. People ask me, will Pakistan engage? I ask a simple question. If you had the horrors of the last 4 decades, and if you had the possibility of the spillover that I'm talking about, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, not a year from now, as the West may be thinking, what would you do? You would engage to ensure that doesn't happen, and that is Pakistan's national security right. But we are talking about coordinating with the world. We are talking about a regional consensus. We've started regional diplomacy. Our foreign minister has been to all countries. Intelligence chiefs have met. Why? Because we are trying to make sure that the world understands the importance of not making the mistakes of the past again. Next slide, please. And I've sort of explained to you, here are our basic concerns. The world is asking us to evacuate Afghans and create a humanitarian air bridge. That can't happen without direct engagement. We are genuinely concerned about the well-being of the average Afghan, much beyond any government or elite in the country. Third, border management, I've explained to you, counterterrorism, refugees. And finally, please don't look at this only as saving ourselves from trouble. Pakistan has transformed its national vision to geoeconomics. One key pillar is connectivity, and Central Asia features centrally in that. So if we have to connect to Central Asia, Afghanistan's stability is critical for us. For all these reasons, for us, it is an imperative to see peace and stability in Afghanistan. That's what we are focused on. Gee, last couple of slides on this, and then I want to spend 3 or 4 minutes on India. This map on the top left, which is never seen or shown, is an official Indian map. It's not mine. I'm sorry about the size. The dots that you see in the east with the border of Pakistan are the overwhelming majority of Indian projects in Afghanistan. And the legend here, if I were to put it, says small development projects. What you see in the West and the rest of the country, the majority of those, the legend, Indian legend, not mine, says high protein biscuit diet. I won't say a word more than that on that. But these very elegantly put dots in development projects, all because perhaps they were bleeding hearts on only the border regions of Afghanistan.
नाज़रीन, PTV करंट अफेयर स्पेशल में आपने अफगानिस्तान की सूरत हाल के तनाजुर में पाकिस्तान का मौक़िफ़ डॉक्टर मोईद यूसुफ से जाना। प्रोग्राम के दूसरे हिस्से में डॉक्टर मोईद ने भारत के पाकिस्तान मुखालिफ मज़मूम जज्बात, ख़ित्ते में हिंदुत्व के तौसी पसंदाना और इंतहा पसंदाना नज़रियात और उनके दुनिया भर के लिए मुमकिन असरात पर बात की है। आइए अब आपको इस ज़िम्न में उनकी जानिब से सामने रखे गए हक़ाइक़ और ख़दशात उर्दू तर्जुमे के साथ दिखाते हैं।
Ladies and gentlemen, were not doing development. Of course, they would put up something, whatever they're doing. We've been repeatedly saying, we put out a dossier last year, not a single country came back to us saying, we don't accept this fact or that fact. Not one country who we shared it with. Somebody needs to introspect and somebody needs to explore and implore what was happening here. Next slide. The EU Disinfo Lab, for those of you who are from Europe would know this more than others, based in Brussels, last December released a report showing that India had a disinformation campaign in 114 countries, 750 plus websites, one goal, create fake news about Pakistan. And let me say this with a lot of disappointment, that governments in Kabul and this machinery constantly created a narrative which said everything wrong with Afghanistan is because of Pakistan. If you fix Pakistan's policy, everything will be fine. Why? Because the corruption, the governance failure, the elite capture, the terrorism from Afghanistan soil, if that story came out, if the border was truly managed and that excuse disappeared, how would you answer to your people as the Afghan government? And with all due respect, it wasn't in the interest of the Western entities whose taxpayers would have asked the same questions they're asking today. Where is my $2 trillion? We kept pointing out that this narrative is going to hurt and embarrass those who are present in Afghanistan one day. Western sources continue to talk about this. I've mentioned SIGA, no response from the world. And today, we have the unfolding of events as we've seen. Next slide. This is from the dossier last year. I'm not going to spend any time. All of you have seen this. To the T, details of what they did in which attack. Even location of terrorist camps, cells in the Indian Prime Minister's office putting money behind undermining CPEC. And the question we were asked was, but Chinese are not attacked. Well, you have it in front of you now. We've put this out in detail. We can give it to you again. Nobody bothered to listen when we were saying what is happening. Next. This is just a slide. All of you have followed this. This is Indian media since 15th August. Honestly, when I look at it, it feels like Delhi has fallen. I don't know what is going on. The left picture is the US F-15 flying over Wales with the caption, Pakistani jets over Panjshir. News alert, Indian mainstream media, debunked by the UK Defense Journal, not by me. Next to it, there is a video game, the 3 gameplay footage or whatever, with the claim that Pakistan has bombed Afghanistan, with a senior former Indian general putting a tweet out saying the Pakistani National Security Advisor is lying, look at the Pakistani plane. This is from a video game in 2016. And then we have put out a dossier 2 days ago on the human rights violations and atrocities in illegally occupied Kashmir. I know all of you are here focused on Afghanistan, but it would be a disservice if I didn't at least spend 5 minutes explaining to you what is happening, and again requesting you not to look at this as divorced from what is happening in the region. All this is a conflict that is connected in terms of where India wants to take it, and let me explain to you why. Next slide. The dossier, I want to be clear, was put out because of this gentleman. Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, probably the staunchest and most upright of leaders that this region has seen, I would say, standing on his conviction, died, and a 90-plus-year-old man's burial was not allowed. The body was snatched. He was wrapped in a Pakistani flag by his family. There were charges brought upon them and FIRs registered by the police for doing that. This is a country that says everything is under control in Kashmir, all is settled, democracy is back. A 90-plus-year-old man's dead body was too much for them to allow their families to have the last rites. I hear a lot about human rights. Please do keep this in mind. India, I saw somewhere, I showed you, diversionary tactic by Pakistan. Let me be clear. We want the entire world focused on Afghanistan, remain focused on Afghanistan. We don't want anybody to take their eye off the ball. We don't want anybody to wash their hands clean, because we want Afghanistan to be stable, and it will only happen through international assistance. So this idea that we want to change the conversation is mind-boggling. Next. This dossier we have here, we will give it to you. There is a CD, there is a barcode. You can open, look at it, and do whatever you like with it, and challenge us if there's a single source that you think is not reliable. There are testimonies of 1,700 plus victims since 2014 included in the dossier. Please look at it and tell me where else in this Pakistan-India context you can come up with this. Next. Here are the mass graves since 1990, 8,652, some of them having up to 17 bodies, unearthed not by me, but by the sources and the reports that are at the bottom left, which you can read in the dossier yourself. Next. These are the ways they're tortured. Please look at Western law and tell me which ones of these anybody has willing to live with, electrocution, burnings, rolling over, which frankly I had to ask my team what that really means, and I don't want to go there. I don't think I can bear it. Cut and slit bodies, all of these verified with sources. 31 different forms of torture. Next. Here is a clip that you can hear from the gentleman himself, again on video, so there is no doubt about the veracity.
Army is a Soda Regiment Dogra, Major Multani. The Patas Tulas was Army Center, that is called torture. This is a column center was as a ruler to land Karas ruler. Yes, Unjitswar started Zangdon Jepper cut. Agar Misseti Zulama Karnet, Patkorne, the government Kanti Ensa, Ya Kasti Cheers, Ya Kahesa means Ayalas.
Okay, this is important. Sorry, this is graphic. We've taken out videos that are in your CD. Watch it advisedly. Chemical weapons, you know, are outlawed globally. India is a signatory. We are not here to say this is what they used or that is what they used. All we are saying is all these pictures match up with use of chemical weapons. There need to be international investigations whether this happened or not. At the very least, get the watchdogs to go and see what has happened. Don't prove me right or hear it from me. At least let somebody go and see that these human beings were humans, had families, and have gone through what I'm showing you here. One can hardly bear to see it. This is not a political statement in any way. Don't use the word Pakistan. Just go and see if this is true. And if it is, international laws must be invoked against the so-called democracy that uses these weapons. Next. You can hear this for yourself.
बहुत सारों की जिंदगी तबाह होगी.
There's a lot said about pellet guns and the use of pellet guns. You know, it hasn't reached a global convention stage, but if you look at all international law experts, all opinions, even the OIC's Independent Human Rights Commission commissioned a study, I know, that this is inhumane in terms of its use. Kids as young as 2 years of age have suffered pellet gun wounds or have died in the process. Countless. This is not one, this is not two. It has been a weapon of choice. 120 killed, 15,000 plus injured. And then this is another very interesting, depressing phenomena, where everybody in the world talks about, oh, India and the use, and all of that is fine. We are not, it's for all countries to decide what relationship they want to have with any other country. But the fact that people don't accept that from the very top, this is being directed. I've just shown you in the last dossier we put out, in the Prime Minister's office is a cell where in the initial tranche, $500 million were put to undermine CPEC. This is another example from their own words, not ours, their own words on what they're saying about the government. This is an Indian Army officer talking about punishment and torture. So many villages here, so many people here, burnt, killed, whatever. Why? Because Modi ji has said, go ahead and kill any Kashmiri you can. And then just towards the end, cluster munitions, another thing that you can go and look at international law and see what they say. Ample evidence, Indian origin, clearly being used in the illegally occupied territory. So just to bring it to where, you know, all of this connects with Afghanistan, why I've put this out. These are coordinates of training camps which are linked to ISIS. When the attack, mother of all bombs or whatever, was dropped on ISIS, you had Indian nationals who died in that. This is the news or the story or whatever that came out. Why am I putting this here? And this is where I want to link this to the conversation. Contrary to what the Indian media, which I've shown you the amount of truth that they're speaking these days, that Pakistan is diverting. Pakistan wants the attention focused on Afghanistan, but Pakistan has never taken attention off IIOJK. And this dossier is a tribute to Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani. There's no question about that. But what you are also hearing now very dangerously in India is, oh, Afghanistan, something's happened. Now this may create trouble in Kashmir. What that linkage is, I don't know. What I do know is that there is a set pattern in Indian narrative. Anytime they get stuck in Kashmir, anytime they think that the world's focus is on them, the conversation about terrorism begins with one link or the other. You end up with violence, some attack somewhere, and suddenly there is a conversation about, oh my God, terrorism in Kashmir. Why? So that the conversation shifts away from human rights violations, from the movement that is in Kashmir, to terrorism. And I'm sorry to say that the world essentially lumps it up, believes it again, and moves away from the real problem, which is the 10 slides I've shown you before this. If the world is going to do that again, I can assure you that India will feel emboldened to create this bogey again and create instability in this region. If anybody has any doubts, please check these. The coordinates are there. No country would put out this kind of detail if we didn't know what was happening. This is an interesting tunnel. One almost wants to go and see where this is and what magic it has. It's called the Samba Tunnel, where every time this diversionary narrative is created by India, 2012, 14, 16, 17, 18, 20, in Indian media, if not officially, this Samba Tunnel is mentioned, or there are terrorists coming from this tunnel. What I want to ask is, if there is a tunnel that you know of for 9 years, why haven't you bothered and gone and closed down the tunnel? I mean, it's mind-boggling. Somebody is cutting, copying and pasting in a document the same name, the same tunnel for 9 years. And nobody is willing to question this. The other thing I'll tell you is, mark the figure 300. Repeatedly you will find 300 terrorists have come. 300 terrorists have come. So if you've got to create a conspiracy theory, a lie, at least make it logical. And here we are, I'm showing you something. For 9 years, the same tunnel. Just to put out how they are dealing with this. Final slide. Very provocative. True to the core. If Pakistan is not going to warn the world, we will be doing a disservice. I'm not going to go into the detail. You have this slide in front of you. All of you are familiar with the history of Europe in the 1930s. Let me just say very plainly. Today it has been proven that what we were saying in Afghanistan was correct. The world was not looking at the real side of this story in terms of internal failures, in terms of the narrative created through Indian support by governments in Kabul. Today I'm saying again and again, and we've said this before, you have got an identical trajectory, an identical mindset, an absolute similarity between the 1930s of Nazi Germany and what is happening in the Hindutva India. I am not at all pointing a finger at India, the people. All I am telling you is we look at the behavior, look at the policies, look at the decisions, we will regret it if parochial economic and tactical and security interests continue to mask the reality of what is happening. And I'm not only talking about internal. Internal is internal, but I must point out that this region is being destabilized. For 20 years, Afghanistan has been destabilized by, quote unquote, the force for good. If we would have been heard, the story would have been different. Today, I hope the world hears, I'm not passing any judgment. Go and look for yourself and compare. As a neighbor, Pakistan has the right to worry, and Pakistan has the right to raise this. From the concept of superiority, you can read the manifesto yourself, to the idea of persecution of Muslims and minorities, the idea of Hindu Rashtra and expansionism. By the way, they think that everything to the Afghan border on the west should be India. What is happening with intellectuals in India, the Delhi pogrom, where Muslims and minorities were killed, and compare it to the 30s there. Corona and typhus. If anybody knows of what happened with the typhus pandemic and how it was blamed on the Jews, and look at the commentary about export of corona from Pakistan, corona and Muslims, and connected to love jihad and all of that, and on and on. The point is, if the world wants to close their eyes, it's going to be at all of our collective failure and at our peril. Let me leave this here. Just end by saying, we're seeing two nodes of concern here. One is Afghanistan, and we have constantly repeated, the world must look ahead now. There is, learn the lessons anybody wants to learn, that's always needed. Now, let's not make the mistakes of the past just for political expediency. Let's make sure we do the right thing for the average Afghan. We engage to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't collapse, the average Afghan doesn't fall into a humanitarian crisis, and counterterrorism and economic goals are met. Mind you, let me also say, I'm saying this is Pakistan's national interest. If anybody in the world thinks that this is not directly in the interest of the international community, they're living in fool's paradise. Neither mass migration nor terrorism respects borders, we know that. So it's a collective responsibility. And second, what is happening on our eastern border, the kind of fake news that was put out, and now I've just shown you what they're saying about Pakistan, verifiably wrong. You will hear more. The word Kashmir and terrorism linked to it. Know what is happening and know where this may end up. So we hope that the world understands where we are coming from. We are not here to plead for anybody or to gain sympathy. Very clearly telling you where this region's interest lies from our perspective. And Pakistan has been a partner, is willing to be a partner going forward. Any and every conversation in the space that we've mentioned, but we will partner transparently. We will do what we say, and we will partner within the ambit of the legal, international law and legal domain.
नाज़रीन, आज के करंट अफेयर स्पेशल में हमने आपको कौमी सलामती के मुशीर डॉक्टर मुईद यूसुफ की खित्ते की सूरत हाल और इस तनाजुर में पाकिस्तान का मौक़िफ़ क्या है, उस हवाले से जो उन्होंने गुज़श्ता रोज़ गैर मुल्की मीडिया के नुमाइंदों से बातचीत की थी, वो उर्दू तर्जुमे के साथ दिखाई है। मज़ीद खबरों के लिए, अपडेट्स के लिए आप पाकिस्तान टेलीविज़न न्यूज़ के साथ रहिएगा।